Let's get started. Thank you, all the kind panelists who have joined me today to discuss why we're startups critical to our response to COVID-19. And I'm happy that this discussion is a part of the Lithuanian GovTech Week and the GovTech Day, International Day of GovTech, because I think it's a very timely discussion. So first I want to thank Simonas, Camila, Aruna and others in the Lithuanian GovTech team for posing this question and finding a very interesting panel to discuss something that, especially at times like these, is very, very useful, because I personally find support from like-minded governments, organizations, startups. This is what has kept me strong going through the crisis. If we didn't have such kind of a family of GovTech around us, I think we would be in a much worse place. But things are well thanks to this community that we have around us, and Lithuania has done a lot of good things in developing that. So a bit about myself and why I should be moderating a panel on that topic. My name is Mikk Vainik. I'm the head of Accelerate Estonia, which is an innovation lab in the government of Estonia aimed at finding complex problems that should be solved by government, but where the government does not have an answer because the problem is just so complex. So the tagline of ours is solving wicked problems. And obviously, COVID-19 is one of those wicked problems that we aim to tackle in novel ways. And as soon as the crisis hit in mid-March, our team set up an online hackathon in 6 hours, which got together 30 teams, building solutions to lower the effect of the crisis, and also to build business models that would be relevant after the crisis. And around 10 of these projects are still working, so that was very successful. And after that, similar hackathons happened all throughout the world, around 70 of them, which basically means that there are thousands of new startup teams who have put their work towards getting rid of the effects of the crisis or building new business models for the new normal. So obviously, startups have been critical in our response. But what aspects are more or less important in that I would like to discuss with the panel today. And one by one, I would like to shortly introduce you and then give each of you an opportunity to tell a little bit more about yourself and your role during the crisis and how you view the startup role in that. So first, I turn to Lithuania. Elijus Čivilis is a former vice minister and governmental CIO in Lithuania, has been leading Digital Lithuania agenda and policymaking towards a very digitally advanced nation, and has been described by peers as a very customer-centered, analytical and easygoing man, and has a big passion in following his own mission. So welcome to the panel, and looking forward to comments from you soon. But next, let's turn to Barbados, where Annalee Babb is advising the government with more than 10 years experience in executive management, especially in areas such as export promotion, public sector government, and national innovation systems. And Barbados is also a nation which has positioned itself to transform digitally, and Annalee has an important role in getting that off the ground. So thank you for joining us today from sunny Barbados. And Kert is one of the 3 co-founders of a startup called MASC. His background and experience is in the pharmaceuticals and healthcare industry, and he has graduated from University of Cambridge and has a degree in chemical engineering. And he's a native Estonian, so I'm glad to see another Estonian on the panel, of course. and but he has spent his life globally, and recently, then during the pandemic, founded MASC with a couple of friends. Last but not least, Alan represents here an investor view with a strong interest in solving societally painful problems. His work also spans to corporates and their ability to innovate, and he has done similar work for many government agencies. So he has a lot of insights to support or tear down some arguments about startups being critical to our response to COVID-19. So thank you, and let's get to it. So I would like each of you to add a bit more in about your role in the ecosystem currently and during the crisis, and maybe in your mind the most important thought why startups were critical to the response. So who wants to go first? If not, then I just point Elijus to go first.
Hey, thanks, Mikk. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here, just also because of the topic, and the topic which I think is now right on time to discuss on what has happened, because now we have enough time to look back and see what worked and what didn't. So at the beginning, I mean, we should say that as nobody expected this crisis to come, and then we saw how everyone responded. And I should say that just like in Estonia and in many other countries, in Lithuania, startups were among the most active. Yes, we also had a fantastic hackathon, more than 1,000 participants, more than 50 teams, and many, many interesting solutions. I mean, and this was really positive and really vibrant emotions dealing with the crisis. But now looking back, I mean, not everything was made in such a bright and beautiful colors, because we realized that the government was not able to adopt those solutions that easily. I mean, although some good examples of the chatbots, of the various solutions were adopted, but in general, I mean, it was not a very productive conversation. I think in full potential, it was not leveraged what startups were able to offer to the government. Of course, out of this whole story, we see now many changes, and especially from the governmental side to be ready to get those benefits. I mean, we've just got approved the GovTech accelerator budget. We've just got a full operating team in the GovTech lab, which is basically solving this silo that we had at that moment. One way or the other, I should admit also that although most of those startups, they have offered really down-to-earth solutions and really solutions to the people, most of the public sector organizations, they didn't get what the value is. And they tend to focus, you know, on really those primitive things like, you know, masks, or physical goods, which are easy to, you know, define and understand. But then it comes, for example, to emotional support or something, you know, you can create a value. They were not accepting that as a critical, you know, in this situation. So all in all, I think that this had made us better place when it comes to the startups and to the innovators, but it's still a lot of things to be done better from the government side for the nearest future.
All right, that's a good insight. Annalee, what's your thought on and your role during the crisis and the most important takeaways?
Thanks so much. I appreciate the invitation to be here. It is sunny in Barbados right now, although I'm inside. But just to be clear, I am the Prime Minister's Special Envoy advising on innovation, science, and smart tech. But I also advise the Ministry of Innovation as well. But what is interesting is I sit on the board of Barbados's only and largest public hospital, which is the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. So we have been having to manage in a very, very, very fluid situation how we deal with even visitors coming into Barbados and so on. the challenge for me is that I can't say, I don't know how much you would know, the panel, or even your viewers, about Barbados, but it's a tiny island state in the Caribbean, about 283,000 people. When COVID struck, obviously tourism would be one of our key sectors, but if no one is traveling and your entire economy is built on tourism, we have seen about a 27% drop at last count in our GDP in Barbados. We lost 30,000 jobs in an economy with 283,000 people. So that becomes a massive challenge. How do you manage it? And part of that challenge is that we could not say in the beginning that we even do have an ecosystem for startups. The government with whom I serve came into power maybe about 2 years ago. And the initial intention was to create a Barbados Tech Accelerator. And we were building toward that. We had some wonderful relationships with CivTech Scotland. And I had just been to Scotland at CivTech in March of this year. And I was right at the tail end before this thing really got serious. I was traveling back to Barbados when most of the country shut down. So the issue becomes, how do you then get a Barbados Tech Accelerator and all these things going when your economy is bottoming out, when your borders are closed and you haven't built the capacity there on the ground? So I believe that part of the challenge in this conversation, I would love for us to explore a bit more, is a small island state surrounded by water. It's not in Europe, for example, where you have borders with other countries and you can have a flow of people and ideas and so on. But in some sense, you're isolated, a small island developing state. You're vulnerable to external shocks. You don't have the capacity built yet to take local ideas and bring them to market. How do you create that in a post-COVID world? So that is what we are being challenged with right now. But even having said that, there are some innovators in Barbados who took it upon themselves to develop solutions and bring them to government. And the great thing about it is that at least one of those innovators built something so useful for the public health emergency management that government has just signed on to help them deliver that solution and bring it to market in collaboration with some external players. So on one level, we're doing it a bit backward from what we should be doing how we should be doing it, but I think that we're getting there. But I'd love to have a conversation on how a small island state can be more involved in that ecosystem development.
All right, so I think it's time to head to Ireland, where Alan may have an answer to that, or then a personal take on how the crisis and startups mingle in your mind.
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. It is sunny in Ireland, on this island as well, although you wouldn't know it from the reddest room in the world that I've ever been in. But so apologies to all the viewers for that. My background, or my primary role at the moment, is working with NDRC. It's a government-backed technology accelerator that invests in about 20 to 30 startups a year. And we also support the commercialization of technologies, research and technologies out of the third level institutes and the research institutes, the universities in Ireland. And I suppose I'm agreeing by and large with some of the points that have already been made. I think the value of startups in the COVID world, you can't have too high an expectation, where they're not going to go and create a vaccine from a startup that was created in March. So there's an expectation mismanagement about what startups can achieve. But I think startups did achieve an enormous amount of energy and psychological support and positivity to the ecosystem. There's a great sense of getting something done and trying to maneuver things. And we know there's kind of analogies around corporates and governments that they're oil tankers and they don't move that fast. But there's tugs that help them to move faster and help them to turn direction a little bit faster. So one example of that, actually, they're going to be talking in the next panel, is one of our investee companies called WIA, who were working on an open ventilator project, and they just started creating it from scratch, and everybody had a sense of enthusiasm, belonging and participation. But then with a little bit of pressure, they got talking to Medtronic, who have a very significant presence here in Ireland, and got them to support the opening up of some of the Medtronic knowledge to aid that ventilator project. So there's something about an expectation and hopes and dreams that we can have of startups, and then there's what they can practically achieve in a crisis, in a global crisis, of this kind of proportion and this sort of timescale. That's something I'd like to explore and to maybe extend the conversation a little bit from the startups with ideas and energy, and maybe the scale-ups, maybe those companies that have been funded by A rounds and B rounds of investment, maybe they've got 50 or 100 people. They're the kind of companies, maybe there's one in Ireland called Nearform, who just rolled out our COVID tracker app. I've rolled it out to Northern Ireland. I think it's been launched in some states in the US this week as well. And in the first couple of weeks, they had 1 million downloads in the Irish population and ended up getting relative population coverage. So there's that difference between this pure startup and the scale-ups who are able to actually implement something at scale to affect COVID. But you're going to hear more about startups in a second from Kert.
Thank you. Exactly. I'd like to turn to Kert now to add a startup view to all of this. So we've heard already that there's been challenges throughout the world in absorbing all of the innovation that was out there, but maybe you can briefly tell us your story as well.
Sure. Thanks, Mikk, and thanks for the introduction. Many great thoughts already, and I'll present the startup view in this mix here as well. So I'll give a brief sort of background what we did with MASC and sort of where we are today, perhaps some of the opportunities, challenges we faced. So we came together in the middle of April as part of the global hack. And the question was, we had a team of 11 people with different backgrounds. We thought, how can we help our native Estonia to solve the crisis? And the problem we identified with just interviews with various personnel in across healthcare sector and in the government was about gathering data about inventories and needs of personal protective equipment. So yes, one thing was sourcing them and supporting the healthcare sector and the public sector institutions that needed personal protective equipment more broadly. But then before ordering or sourcing anything, the question was, but actually, let's help us to plan. How much do we have across the country already, and how much do we need? How do we forecast? And once we source something, what's the most equitable way to distribute the personal protective equipment, be it masks, respirators, gloves, gowns, and so on. So that was the problem we solved. So the platform MASC we created was after the hackathon taken into use by the Estonian Ministry of Social Affairs, the Health Board, and the Ministry of Finance, who supported the crisis response team with the task of giving the overview. So the platform helped to collect information from 300 public sector institutions about the demand, inventory, and shipments, and helped to make decisions. So taking pressure off from the institutions themselves, who had to do a lot of reporting to different parts of the government, but also taking the administrative so cost of the crisis response team and the health board and the ministries. So a communication tool and a mix of a communication tool and an ERP perhaps. But similar sort of problems or discussion points that we saw, our challenge was, how can we find a problem that we can actually do something about? So starting to tackle too big of a problem was a risk for us in the beginning phase. And then once we sort of implemented something, following up, working closely with government. Again, just great example from Estonia where the ecosystem is supporting us being in here and supporting. That meaning from the government side, we're also hearing the problems and them being open to work with us, perhaps taking a risk at the beginning to give us a chance, but then after we prove ourselves and working closely with them, really sticking to it. So the system is still being used today as well. And I mean, as we go on with the discussion, many other points to bring out as well, but just as an introduction, and maybe I'll stop here for a second.
Okay, thank you. So what's clear from our discussion already that there are some challenges on how might government help startups become critical in tackling this crisis, and different countries have different problems. In Barbados, it's about the small community where some of these processes to get startups in are not in place, or the ecosystem needs more development. in Lithuania as well, in Estonia, it's sometimes about working in silos and not being able to break this down quickly enough. And I think Alan, you took it together very well, that there has been challenges in expectation management. So let's talk about that a little bit. Although there were challenges, I think as you mentioned a really important point that now you've learned that those silos need to be broken down. So maybe you can give us a little bit an example of how that has already happened, or how you foresee that that kind of cross-ministerial cooperation can evolve, so that it can take in startups in a better manner than during this crisis.
Right, that's a really good question, because if I step back a little bit and think of the startups, they're really much customer-centric, right? But the problem with the governments, that the governments themselves, they are customers for the startups. And this is basically both ways a gap that we see. We see the startups not being able to deal with their customers, meaning governments, who basically pay for the solution. And then the governments not being able to work with the startups because of the public procurement and many other processes that limiting, this compatibility. So I think the step needs to be taken from both sides. And both sides, I think, this is where we need platforms like this GovTech, like this GovTech Week, where basically we have all stakeholders talking to each other. Firstly, learning about each other. Because the problem with the governments that they're, of course, really constrained with the legislations, with the public procurements, but it's not about only this. This is first about the culture. And the culture is really much linked to the disbelief, that those few people from this very small organization can do really a beneficial product for you, because you own the risk. You own the risk, and you don't have any evidences why those guys or girls who came together a week ago, they can, justify the spend, and they can guarantee solving the problem, which is a national-wide problem. It's not just, a problem for a single person. So, of course, the cultural change, this is something not will happen overnight, but this is led by good examples. So, of course, that's happening. And this is maybe also my advice to Barbados, that you definitely not have to be isolated as a physical island, because then we talk about the startups, the GovTech. This is by definition not bounded by a single country, by a single, geographical unit. This is rather, cross-sectoral. And I think going into the collaborations and inviting different startups that work for Lithuania, Estonia, or Ireland to turn back to the least developed ecosystems, that's already a good step. So from the governments, this is a cultural change. And then from the startups, unfortunately, you might be the most exciting group of people, hipsters with very nice informal culture. But sorry, your client is a government, and you have to really understand what it takes, to have a communication and conversation. So I think that you should not underestimate what it takes to break the bureaucracy and those barriers. Happy that we have now GovTech. We have those bright people who help to do that through the challenges. But of course, we want it to be at much bigger scale in the nearest future.
All right. Thank you. Alan, you want to step in?
Yeah, I just add to that. So there's a culture, I agree, there's a culture piece around who your buyer is, who your customer is, getting through procurement channels and so on. But COVID amplifies that. So to the best of my knowledge, the Irish government has spent about 2 billion euros on PPE equipment this year that they didn't think that they would need to do. That's my face mask. I have no idea about the certification. I have no idea about the quality of that face mask. In a time of COVID, with a government buyer, there has to be a balance on both sides between achieving a regulatory burden and managing a regulatory burden for the products and services that are going to be rolled out. I really like Kert's example of trying to pick a problem maybe that wasn't in the regulated space, but was still able to benefit the wider COVID community. So there's a healthcare burden that is required, and a regulatory burden with dealing with your gov partner. The other element that I think is interesting and a challenge for a startup that just is not that surmountable is if we're going to take the COVID lens as an opportunity for startups to develop new products, systems, services, and roll those out, they need to be rolled out on day one to a maximum audience. And what I mean by that is that COVID tracking app that we have in Ireland that I mentioned from Nearform, in the space of a week, they got about 1 million downloads. A startup has just not been able to deliver that type of capacity. If we want to roll out ventilators, we need to roll out 600 medical grade certified ventilators through 22 different hospitals at once. A startup can't try to achieve that and are going to come up against a brick wall if they're going to try and talk to a government buyer about that. So there's probably an alignment on both sides. Yes, the problem needs to be solved, but it needs to be aligned with the buyer's capacity to buy it, to roll it out, and then the startup's capacity to deliver that at scale. It's not an easy challenge. And in large part, it might be insurmountable. And then you start thinking about that COVID might have given an opportunity to open up greater government startup procurement and partnering outside of the COVID lens. And maybe that, we're going to be looking for the next couple of years, a new relationship and a new incentivization between government and startup partners for other products and services in other areas. E-learning, for instance, at the moment, as we're this week in Ireland, at least, I'm not sure what your academic calendars are like, but this week, X 100,000 kids went back to school and with mixed degrees of e-learning and remote learning. That's also areas that there's enormous sectors where startups can still participate with government, even if not perhaps maybe directly in the medical arena, for instance.
So very good points there. Kert, what do you think? Scaling and finding the right problem, is that something that startups can do in a very limited amount and then effectively sell it to governments who need it at scale and might not have the right culture for that? Seems like a massive headache.
It certainly is a headache and something we have faced as well ourselves. So it was certainly our experience given the ecosystem in Estonia, it was easy to access the government, them to share their problems and really allow us to present our solution to the problem and take it from there, actually starting to use our platform and then stick to it so we can improve it further over time. But then sort of the 8 weeks after the first implementation, we also started offering our solution sort of as a SaaS solution to other countries as well. But that certainly wasn't easy. So scaling government tech, not always easy, but also like it's easy for me to say everyone should start using our platform. I mean, it's also our job in a startup space to find ways to scale our tech. Yeah. So immediately we started thinking, okay, first, how do we make sure that our platform is relevant also after the crisis? So big sort of thing we've been working on ever since we went live with our first iteration. And then secondly, is there also a market in the private sector, or are there other problems related to the problems that we're helping to solve with our current solution for the government? So these two things have definitely helped us keep moving, and the government procurement timelines will catch up eventually. We just have to have patience too. So obviously, if things would happen overnight, we would love it. Shorter we can make decision-making processes for implementing new solutions that help, we'll be all for it. But we have to have, as small growing startups, also a little bit of patience in the process, I believe. But not to wait for it. Just keep moving forward and find other problems in the similar space that we can contribute to. That's why we, for example, started looking on the sourcing side, building a B2B marketplace for verified products. So just sort of learning more and more problems in the same vertical has helped us to scale and find market also outside of the crisis.
All right, thank you. So, Annalee, does that sound useful in your context, or what kind of what would you add to this discussion?
Well, I am particularly taken with the points that Elijus made. I believe that for small island states in particular, global collaborations are critical. one of the first things after COVID that our Prime Minister did, and you may have heard of it, but she started to market the notion of a Barbados welcome stamp, inviting very skilled people and others who are interested in working from a country like Barbados that's still relatively safe and is managing COVID pretty well to work from here. But I see going beyond that there are companies that are startups in other places that may want to scale up more quickly by coming to a country like Barbados and using it as a beachhead to enter other markets and do other things. But a part of what I see the opportunity in that is that companies can also help to change government's culture, because I do believe that certainly for Barbados and the Caribbean, the culture of how we procure is a culture that, to my mind, is against the notion of startups and helping them to grow and to scale. And is this not an opportunity I think we have to face that economies all around the world are transitioning, and a lot of damage has been done in terms of economic growth and so on. Is this not an opportunity for countries around the world and like Barbados to look again at these models of procurement that we insist that governments follow and see, is there a way for us to transform that and change it so that there is a startup culture, certainly for projects or potential solutions under a certain amount of money, and that you can have those global alliances. The solution that we have developed here, just to respond to COVID, we put together a project with an outside or overseas company supplying wristbands and doing some other stuff, but working with a startup in Barbados to manage the whole database and how we treat to that in the healthcare system. And so I believe that there are opportunities for us to do the whole startup ecosystem in a different way. And I certainly would be keen to have that discussion on a wider scale, because I do agree that the digital revolution means that you are not limited by the boundaries or borders of your country, even if you're an island way over in the Atlantic Ocean, that you can engage and work with people outside of Barbados and even invite some of them here to work from here and to help you to develop your own ecosystem. And I believe that that's the direction that Barbados will be going.
Right. Alan, you wanted to add on top of that?
Did anyone else just hear that we got an invite from the Prime Minister's Envoy of Barbados to come to Barbados and work? Did everyone else hear that as well, right?
And I'll back up the invitation. I would love to see us do something around small island states and innovation, climate change, and COVID.
Agreed. I was going to come in and reflect, and Annalee, you made some of this point as well. Three of us are here from small nations, and sometimes we don't expect Washington, Berlin, Paris to be able to make these changes. Nor can we compete with larger countries in terms of the gross amount of capital or venture capital and wider investment capital that's available. But in the smaller countries, we are operating something a little bit more dynamic. Estonia is a leader. Lithuania is a leader. Barbados sounds like a Caribbean leader, and Ireland hopefully has been a leader over the last number of years in our development. So there's something about the smaller countries having a little bit more nimbleness than the big ocean liners, that we can make some changes. And as Annalee mentioned, is there different procurement pathways that governments can operate? So I put there the challenge to begin with, that startups weren't going to be the answer, but also governments do have to do something. So governments have to provide sandboxes, test beds, alternative procurement pathways, laboratories which can go outside, not break, but maneuver outside of the current procurement guidelines to allow new companies to be able to bring their innovations, ideas and thought processes to governments. So that's a two-sided coin that the governments have a lot of work to do too.
Yeah, I'm very much with Alan on what he just said. I mean, the only size which limits is your ambitions. I mean, I think that us having this unique characteristic coming from smaller countries, that's even better, because you have much less legacy. think of, I don't know, Germany and convincing now them, to get rid of the automotive industry. That's impossible. Think of France and saying them, hey, you have to get rid of agriculture. I mean, it's impossible because we have such a strong, ecosystems out there that they will never ever, put their priorities somewhere else. So it's much easier to convince the major country to make a shift. The second aspect, Alan also mentioned, thinking of Lithuanian fintech, which is one of the most cited ecosystems in the world. It's all based, on those small bits and pieces, like sandboxes, like access to the payment systems, like technological infrastructure that startups can use, and that's fairly easy to set up compared to the big national systems. And then finally, I would just comment on this public procurement and limitations in Barbados for startups to get in the conversation with the governments. This, of course, I mean, every time you think of the technologies, you think of something like really complicated, complex, and really mystified. But there are many other examples in the world where the government's able to deal with that. Think of, for example, I don't know, architecture design contest, where someone is bidding, with different ideas how to build a new bridge, and then the number one is awarded. So basically, you can apply the same process, bidding for the problems to be solved by the startups, where they just participate in the contest for the best idea. The first three could be awarded, for example, and then another project signed with the winner, right? This is just an example. I just want to say that some countries, they have different experiences already, and I think uniqueness that you have being yourself. I mean, Barbados, that sounds super exotic, that sounds super good, and I think it's much more attractive, than Lithuania or Estonia. So you should play the card on this fantastic uniqueness.
So, thank you. Before we actually jump to the solution space, I actually wanted to kind of turn the table around and argue that maybe startups were not critical to the response to COVID-19. And but I already heard about a lot of bottlenecks that basically my current conclusion is that startups could have been much more critical to our response, but there are some things that we just need to tackle before that is really possible. But before we jump to the solution space, I have a few ideas of my own. Is there anything else? What are the other elephants in the room that really keep us from engaging with startups in a meaningful way? If there's not any, then just let me know. But is there something that's on your mind still?
Maybe I just point out just an idea, maybe what we have experienced ourselves as part of sort of working with the government, building something fairly quick, implementing, scaling with MASC. Just always the question mark of us proving us as a young team, being able to solve important problems. So maybe there's also some missing part in terms of partnership. Maybe there needs to be a bigger company there. Maybe there needs to be an active investor from the get-go. Maybe there needs to be more partners from very early on. The reason I'm saying or thinking about this, otherwise we have a situation where startups are competing with mature companies, which is great. And there are many spaces where this is very important. But during the crisis where things need to be done quickly and move fast, which readiness is there from a startup, but maybe the readiness is not there from a bigger, more mature company. However, longer term partnership, there is something to contribute from both sides. Startup can help to get there quick, but maybe a more mature company can support the sort of the next steps as we go to longer term deals, sort of stable procurement process after that. Otherwise, we'll be in a situation where we'll implement quickly something as a startup, but then when we face the outside of crisis moment, we're not competitive in that space anymore. So maybe just throwing out ideas for us to think. So far, so good in Estonia, but I think this could have perhaps helped us in other markets to enter. But that takes some readiness from a mature company in the field as well to take a leap of faith. And that model probably needs to be so maybe thought through a little bit more, but just idea out there.
I think that's, if I might, a really, really important point. And it comes back to my suggestion that we need to completely rethink this ecosystem and how it works. And perhaps government does have a role to play, both in identifying potential partners, maybe even having databases of startups and other bigger companies that might be prepared to partner. But there has to be some kind of public-private partnership and engagement, and these silos are going to have to come down. I know they exist for a reason, but the world in 2020 and beyond is not the world that we were sitting in before March 2020. And so this again creates an opportunity for us to have conversations around and create new spaces for people to be able to innovate. And that's one of the biggest issues that we see in Barbados is governments don't want to procure with the small players and the startups because they don't think they have a proven track record or history or capability of scaling up. But that should not be an inhibitor to a company if it has a great idea. The question is, how do we get it to market and how can we create the environment that allows them to flourish? And I believe that we need to ask some different questions and look at some different kinds of solutions than those that have existed traditionally. But I think your points are excellent.
Can I add in a kind of a more of a thought? Any customer is buying a product or a service for the need that they have. Are we talking about asking governments to buy products for two reasons? One, to deliver the needs that they have, and the other to stimulate an ecosystem. So in Ireland, for instance, we have, and it's probably common to other countries, we have centralized procurement because the government is the biggest buyer of anything in this country. And there's a requirement in, I don't know what percentage of tenders by value or by number of tenders that must include an SME participation in the tender response. So yes, Accenture and IBM will win a lot of the government contracts as they should do, but they also have to include participation and partnership, as Kert was bringing to the fore, of SMEs. But I think Annalee mentioned earlier on that we're looking for a culture shift in government. So we don't just want them to buy, the face masks because they need face masks. We want them to buy face masks with a public good in order to stimulate maybe startup or scale up or SME technologies, knowing that they might not always get the most economically advantageous response, but they might be generating another stimulus for the country. That turns into a political decision, which is probably worth exploring, but it's hard.
All right, we are now stepping into solution phase, and I'm very happy about it. So a couple of things that I've come across in my own work that have helped me along a lot. Maybe that's just as a Kickstarter to that part of the discussion. So basically what startups provide when governments buy from them is research and development. We don't know the outcome of what they are providing us, and it might be different than we've initially expected. But if you embrace that, then at least in Estonia, I've been able to use this exemption of R&D, which means that if this is describable as an R&D, then so many of the procurement laws don't really apply. And that has helped me along a lot. Obviously, if you tell that story to your lawyers at the ministry, they will find numerous reasons why it's not the case. But then it's always possible to find a second, a third, and a fourth opinion until you find a way through. And if that is that happened to me personally, it was really, really useful. But if for some reason that is not enough, then what I've heard from different counterparts in the Estonian government is that the ability to innovate is much higher if there is some public figure who says that, hey guys, this area needs to innovate. I'm going to be supporting the government throughout all of their experiments. we just need to get through this wall right now. So if someone takes off the pressure of failing, then that's a big step forward in the cultural shift as well. But I'd like to hear some other examples of how to tear down those walls. Anyone can go first.
Very, very similar way, as you just said, some public figure sort of openly saying and inviting startups to solve their problems. I think similar way during the hackathons we had, at least in Estonia, some of the, and then from many countries across the world really, during the global hack, we had someone from the government attending event like hackathon. Yeah, so publicly sharing problems that they have and something that could be tackled by startups. So again, probably just more active, maybe a little proactive involvement in the sort of creation process from government representatives. That could be similar example, but just through the hackathon types of events could work as well.
Okay, Elijus, what has worked for Lithuania over the past few years?
Well, my silver bullet and number one bet is on skills, on people skills. But then I say skills, it's not the startup skills. That's the skills of the citizens, and that's the skill of the politicians, and that's the skills of the public servants. I mean, most of those people, they don't consider technology as a resolution just because they don't know and they have no knowledge and no skills to understand that. I mean, if there is a traditional farm, for example, they would never ever, use apps to help them to harvest their goods, not just because they're against, they just have no skills to explore or understand that they need that. So my major focus before I left the government was purely on skills and purely on the public servant skills, because at the end of the day, that's humans who procure for the humans who need, help. And I think the more educated we have public sector, the more educated we have politicians in the parliament, the easier it is. I mean, I can share with you some, like a year ago or more than 1.5 years ago, we made the very first machine learning course for the parliament members in Lithuania, and it was a great success because those people, of course, they didn't learn machine learning in one session, but at least they realized, I mean, how that works, and it's not mystified anymore to them. It's easier for them than, to understand what the society is talking about, where the future comes from, why the jobs will be replaced. I mean, why? I mean, they now have at least basic knowledge. And I think this is the way to go. And this has to be very much escalated in events like this GovTech Week, where we really want everyone to be educated. Also the citizens. I mean, if citizens are dumb, if they don't need, technologies, they just need, bricks and mortars, then we can't do much. So we need everyone to be on the same page, including all the age groups, including all the regions, including everyone.
If I might, those are two excellent points from Kert and Elijus as well. And they triggered something for me as I was listening, that I believe from my experience, it's okay to talk about stuff. And you can lobby and you can write proposals and strategies and talk. But people really learn, in my view, by doing and by experiencing. And what I have been pushing in Barbados is to be able to do some kind of proof of concept, to pull together. It's like a pilot project. So you're bringing in private sector, you're bringing in skilled people, and you're actually sinking your teeth into something that's doable, to show people that, yes, we can innovate within government, but we can work with small players and big players, and here is what it would look like. And so that certainly is the stage we are right now, just to show people that it's not just talk, that we can do this, and we have the capability, the creativity, the innovative potential, and also the global networks and skill sets to make this happen. And my experience has been, when people start to see and feel what is possible even in themselves, because certainly with Barbados's history, I think you would be aware that we are a former colony slavery was a way of life just hundreds of years ago here. So it could be that culturally embedded in people is not a sense that they have the capability or the capacity or the skill sets or the gifts to be able to do stuff. And so once you can show them that, yes, you have it in you and here is how you can make it happen, then people, you almost begin to see a snowball effect. Forgive the metaphor, because we don't actually have snow in Barbados, but you understand the point I'm making, that you then create the ability to get to a tipping point where you can begin to see a shift in how people are thinking. And I would like to see more of our countries take that approach in addition to the other solutions that were suggested.
Can I add
Sure.
a challenge to us? I think even on this call, we've all been guilty of it. We refer to Gov as if it's one thing. I just did a quick Google there. There are over 200 state agencies in Ireland. There's lots of points of contact. There's lots of opportunity, but that's not to take away from the difficulty of getting into access government. I think what a leader in a government can do is try to help to signpost innovation agencies, test beds, individual agencies within the healthcare system or within the public procurement system that can give points of access to startups and scale-ups, be they technology or otherwise. And that may be an opportunity for, again, our smaller countries where those points of access might be just a little bit more accessible, a little bit more available to companies coming through. So mapping out those type of resources and points of entry. I remember a good few years ago, I can't quote this as current data, but the Irish government did have a listing of all of the different grant and information supports that were available to Irish startups and SMEs. It ran to about 14 pages. Just of the entry points. After that, you had to dive down through, and we've had a number of different menu and signposting systems to try and navigate your way through that. That's hard, and it's not a startup's natural inclination to deal with that type of process. We surely can be able to do that a little easier and provide points of access to get the solution potentials into the government buyers.
May I respond really quickly directly to Alan, because one of the challenges, again, which is not necessarily a reason not to act, but a country like Barbados, we have a cabinet of about 20-something people that everything above a certain level needs to go through. So even if you're a statutory corporation, and we do have those, state-owned enterprises and other kinds of any engagement with government is going to still have to go through that bottleneck, which makes it a bit more of a challenge. So I just wanted to put that on the table, that it still keeps coming back to the necessity for a real shift in the government culture and the way it thinks about how to do innovation and startups if we're going to kind of break the silos down.
All right, this has been a very, very constructive discussion today, and I guess if the original question was why were startups critical to our response to COVID-19, then what we've discussed mostly is that yes, they were critical, but we would have liked them to be even more critical, but they weren't because of a number of bottlenecks such as capacity, culture, doing or not doing experiments, finding the right problem, working in silos, not having sandboxes, and not using the legal exemptions that are actually in our hand as policymakers. So if we come back digitally, I hope like really come back to the next GovTech week, either in Lithuania or other locations. So as a last remark, maybe each of you can take one of those keywords and say which one you will fight for to get rid of, so we can see how that experiment has gone for you. I will personally do all that I can to change the culture, because how we operate in Estonia is bringing entrepreneurs in residence into solving those complex problems, and these people don't know what is impossible. So a lot becomes possible. But what would your trick be, and your last words on this panel?
I think I'll turn it a little upside down and say, I'll still, with all the problems we identified today, I'll still encourage all startups not to be afraid of going and helping the government. I think lots of opportunities, and although we have problems and we have to work on them, that doesn't mean, because also there needs to be readiness from a startup side or just people from different fields coming together and starting something and trying to help to even do that. So I think there's been a lot of encouragement that there are problems, but problems we can solve together. And again, big thank you to again all the people we have been working with from the Estonian government so far, who has been ready to work with us, share their problems, and really and perhaps take those silos and barriers a little bit apart. So that would be my final thought here.
I might add a final thought that the COVID isn't over, and it's going to be around. So absolutely, step one is stay safe and look after your people, look after your startup in a wider ecosystem level. And from a government support point of view, there is going to be changes to the investment landscape, and there is going to be changes to the amount of capital that's available to early stage startups. And I think that's something that we could maybe fight for the next GovTech week, and to see that more early stage stimulus and support has been put into those startups. And as a final word from me, to think that while COVID is still ongoing, we will get through it from a medical point of view at some point in time. But it's going to have changed everything. It's going to change work practices. It's going to have changed urban practices. It's going to have to change education and lifestyles and people, and that there is enormous opportunities for startups there, as well as directly with GovTech.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, for me, I think that you felt a theme coming through. I'm talking culture, government culture. But it occurs to me that culture is not going to shift without the education and re-education of how people think. So if I had to invest my time in anything right now, it would be about educating and getting people in government to understand the importance of startups, but startups also to understand, here's how government works. Here's how we can create alignment. And a huge one is to get the private sector that has resources educated about the opportunities that they're sitting on, because they are not engaging through this crisis, but kind of holding on right now to what they have. In Barbados, it is not sustainable for this country to continue to depend so heavily on tourism. We see what happens when you do that. So there is this wealth of ideas and opportunities and potential that is being untapped. We have to do it differently. And I think education is probably going to go a long way to helping us to make that transition. But education that allows some hands-on action and activity, so people move beyond talk to actually producing value.
All right, Elijus, what do you reckon?
Well, mine would be 3 points. First, this is the best timing for the startups, because startups love disruption, and COVID is disruption in many ways. So it's good. I mean, and if it's not over, it's even better. I mean, this sounds nasty, but this is how it is for the startup. Second, we talk about the government. As I said, we talk about the people who do, their daily job. And if something is not working from the government point of view, most probably that's because of the people who have little knowledge, or they're afraid, or they're scared. So talk to the people. I mean, don't be afraid. Things even asking in changing the law. I mean, I can tell you, I have changed a lot of laws over the last half a year just because we had to be flexible in the government. So all the laws are changeable. Everything can be done. You just have to have really conversation going on. And finally, I mean, I really liked what Alan and Annalee said, that, education. And I mean, the only way is to get together, is to be on the same level. So you want to be your government educated, your customer educated, and this is the only way to grow together. And
Right.
by the way, guys, I mean, it's easy when it comes to the tangible things like technology, like buildings, but it's the most complicated are the soft things. So let's focus on the soft things and removing them first.
All right. So thank you all to all the panelists. That concludes our discussion on how or why startups were critical to our response to COVID-19. And personally very happy that we discussed that and that question was posed by GovTech Week Lithuania. Thank you for having us. Enjoy the conference and see you around soon. Thank you.